Mr. Delisle was thinking the stairwell is sure to impress visitors. Now that he was a company manager, who could say who might visit the building? The workmen toiled for several hours. They ran up and down the stairs and ate their lunches squatting against the banister poles. They hammered, shouted, spat, and cursed. They wiped their seat with the ends of their turbans. In general, they made it impossible for Burima to sweep the stairwell that day. To occupy the time, Burima retired to the rooftop. She shuffled along the parapets, but her hips were sore from sleeping on the newspapers. After consulting the horizon on all four sides, she tore what was left of her quilts into several strips and resolved to polish the banister poles at a later time. By early evening the residents gathered to admire the day's labor. Even Burima was urged to rinse her hands under the clean running water. She sniffed. Our bath water was scented with petals and attars. Believe me, don't believe me. It was a luxury you cannot dream. Mr. Delisle proceeded to demonstrate the basin's various features. He turned each faucet completely on and completely off. Then he turned on both faucets at the same time to illustrate the difference in water pressure. Lifting a small lever between the faucets allowed water to collect in the basin if desired. The last word in elegance, Mr. Delisle concluded. A sure sign of changing times, Mr. Chatterjee reputedly admitted from his balcony. Among the wives, however, resentment quickly brewed. Standing in line to brush their teeth in the mornings, each grew frustrated with having to wait her turn, for having to wipe the faucets after every use, and for not being able to leave her own soap and toothpaste on the basin's narrow periphery. The Delisles had their own sink. Why do the rest of them have to share? Is it beyond us to buy sinks of our own? One of them finally burst out one morning. Are the Delisles the only one who can improve the conditions of this building? Asked another. Rumors began spreading that, following their argument, Mr. Delisle had consoled his wife by buying her 2 kilos of mustard oil, a cashmere shawl, a dozen cakes of sandalwood soap, that Mr. Delisle had filed an application for a telephone line, that Mrs. Delisle did nothing but wash her hands in her basin all day. As if this weren't enough, the next morning a taxi bound for Howrah Station crammed its wheels into the alley. The Delisles were going to Simla for 10 days. Burima, I haven't forgotten. We will bring you back a sheep's hair blanket made from the mountains, Mrs. Delisle said through the open window of the taxi. She was holding a leather purse in her lap which matched the turquoise border of her sari. We'll bring two, cried Mr. Delisle, who was sitting beside his wife, checking his pockets to make sure his wallet was in place. Of all the people that lived in that particular flat building, Burima was the only one who stood by the collapsible gate and wished them a safe journey. As soon as the Delisles were gone, the other wives began planning renovations of their own. One decided to barter a stack of her wedding bracelets and commissioned a whitewasher to freshen the walls of the stairwell. Another pawned her sewing machine and summoned an exterminator. A third went to the silversmith and sold a set of pudding bowls. She intended to have the shutters painted yellow. Workers began to occupy this particular flat building night and day. To avoid the traffic, Burima took sleeping on the roof. So many people passed in and out of the collapsible gate, so many others clogged the alley at all times, that there was no point in keeping track of them. After a few days, Burima moved her baskets and her cooking bucket to the rooftop as well. There was no need to use the basin downstairs, for she could just as easily wash, as she always had, from the cistern tap. She still planned to polish the banister poles with the strip she had torn from her quilts. She continued to sleep on her newspapers. More rains came. Below the dripping awning, a newspaper pressed over her head, Burima squatted and watched the monsoon ants as they marched along the clothesline, carrying eggs in their mouth. Damper winds soothed her back. Her newspapers were running low. Her mornings were long, her afternoons longer. She could not remember her last glass of tea. Thinking neither of her hardships nor of earlier times, she wondered when the Delisles would return with her new bedroom. She grew restless on the roof, and so for some exercise, Burima started circling the neighborhood in the afternoons, reed broom in hand, sari smeared with newspaper ink. She wandered through markets and began spending her life savings on small treats. Today a puffed rice, tomorrow some cashews, the day after that a cup of sugarcane juice. One day she walked as far as the bookstalls on College Street. The next day she walked even further, to the produce markets in Bow Bazaar. It was there, while she was standing in a shopping arcade surveying jackfruits and persimmons, that she felt someone tugging on the free end of her sari. When she looked, the rest of her life savings and her skeleton keys were gone. The residents were waiting for Burima when she returned that afternoon at the collapsible gate. Baleful cries rang up and down the stairwell, all echoing the same news. The basin on the stairwell had been stolen. There was a big hole in the recently whitewashed wall, and a tangle of rubber tubes and pipes was sticking out of it. Chunks of plaster littered the landing. Burima gripped her reed broom and said nothing. In their haste, the residents practically carried Burima up the stairs to the roof, where they planted her on one side of the clothesline and started screaming at her from the other. "This is all her doing," one of them hollered, pointing at Burima. "She informed the robbers. Where was she when she was supposed to guard the gate? For days she's been wandering the streets, speaking to strangers," another reported. "We shared our coal, gave her a place to sleep. How could she betray us this way?" a third wanted to know. Though none of them spoke directly to Burima, she replied, believe me, I did not inform the robbers." "For years we've put up with your lies," they retorted. "You expect us now to believe you?" Their recriminations persisted. How could they explain it to the Dalals? Eventually they sought the advice of Mr. Chatterjee. They found him sitting on the balcony watching a traffic jam. One of the second-floor residents said, "Burima has endangered the security of this building. We have valuables. The widow Miss Misra lives alone with her phone. What should we do?" Mr. Chatterjee considered their arguments. As he thought things over, he adjusted the shawl that was wrapped around his shoulders and gazed at the bamboo scaffolding that now surrounded his balcony. The shutters behind him, colorless for as long as he could remember, had been painted yellow. Finally he said, "Burima's mouth is full of ashes, but that is nothing new. What is new is the face of this building. What a building like this needs is a real Durwan." So the residents tossed her buckets and rags, her baskets and reed broom, down the stairwell, past the letter boxes, through the collapsible gate, and into the alley. Then they tossed out Burima. All were eager to begin their search for a real Durwan. From the pile of belongings Burima kept only her broom. Believe me," she said once more as her figure began to recede. She shook the free end of her sari, but nothing rattled.